Okay, crew. So this video is about GPT 5.1 and how it affects my workflow specifically. What I'm going to need to do is explain to you what my workflow is, but I'll be very brief with that. Then we're going to go into the comparison, both what GPT says about GPT and my experience from yesterday. Keep in mind, GPT memory exists, and so I've been using GPT for about a year, the Pro version, and I've used the same workflow consistently for like a year. And so it really does have a bunch of data that it can use and give me an accurate comparison of my workflow. And then the third thing I'll do is I'll just explain just a bit more about my experience with yesterday. So not just what GPT says about GPT and that experience thing, but practical examples, things that actually happened yesterday while I was programming, and I'll give you an example of the EA that I was working on. I'll show you a bit about that as well. All right, let's begin. So first thing to go over is my actual workflow. And the way that it works is I ask GPT for ready to be compiled code. Here's some of the examples of code that it just chose to give me where I use this workflow. But essentially, and these both, by the way, are on by bigboat.com, open source. You can get the code. Essentially, how that works is I ask GPT to give me full, ready to be compiled code with uh, with small iterations. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I know that my idea is kind of similar to another idea that exists, like let's say martingale or pyramiding or like some sort of a moving average crossover. So I'll just say add this feature, the moving average crossover or whatever it is, and then I'll iterate and I'll say, okay, great, but make this small modification. Don't forget, give me the full ready to be compiled code with no comments embedded within it, and we'll get into that a little later. But that's my workflow. I just keep getting ready code, copy it, paste it into the IDE, click compile, and we go. We just go. So that's the first unique aspect about how I use GPT. Second unique aspect, is iterative micro updates, and that's what I want to get into a little bit more. So incrementally adding features one by one puts you in a position where you can actually get some suggestions from GPT about what works and what doesn't, and you can see what's easy for GPT to add in terms of the logic to your strategy, your expert advisor, and what's difficult. And then you just kind of have that data, kind of anecdotal data moving forward when you work on the next project. So I know, for example, GPT struggles with moving averages with colors for some reason. That's just something that doesn't work well all the time. And so the next time I try to do something with moving averages, I know that this is a struggle. I'll be extra careful with that. And yeah, like I said a bit earlier, which is to add this and then remove that, invert this. So what I'll do is I'll set everything up for going long only, even if I'm doing a market neutral strategy. And then after everything, I'll say invert, do it the other way around, mirror, and it works. So that's the second unique aspect. The third is strict formatting. This is arguably the most important part of my workflow with GPT, which is let's not detract from what we're trying to do by adding comments embedded within the code or explanations giving me this is what this thing does, and it's like I don't need to know this, or suggestions at the end, right? Suggestions should be very brief. I like suggestions, but don't give me like a paragraph about what you think should be next. Take all this tokens that I'm paying for, basically, spend it on giving me the code that actually works. Say you have 100 tokens. If you just tell GPT, make this ready to be compiled code, it's going to spend a bunch of tokens on embedding comments within the code because that's best practices. Okay, and it is if you're a person writing code and sharing it with another person because they need to know what's going on. You want to put the comments, but it's not best practices for GPT. So don't embed comments. Don't give me like a long explanation. Keep it really small and brief. And that way you get just more reasoning power allocated to giving you that code that actually works and is accurate for what you want to do. Okay, so that's really briefly my workflow. Okay, the key concepts of my workflow. And you can just check other videos out if you want to see that in practice. But first, let's talk more about GPT 5.1. So I compared three. This is what GPT says, and then I'll talk about my experience, and we'll really dig deep into that yesterday, working with it. So GPT-5, the basic model, 60 to 70% reliable. In my experience, it's like a lot less. It's just not that reliable. But probably it gave me this stat because I know when I use GPT-5 that it's going to be not that good. So I'll just use really, really basic, kind of simple prompts, do this and do that. So that's why it's so high. Actually, it's a lot less reliable than that. Second is the Pro. So for Pro, it says strong, deep, and it's like slower, more thinking. 70 to 80% reliable. Again, that's just way too high. I would say like a solid 50, 60%. More complex tasks, again. Now, yesterday, my experience with 5.1, I would say it was, and I used the same complex tasks. I asked it to add features, and we chose difficult features. I would say like it's up there at like 70, 80. So this is like probably 50. This is like 70, 80, which is considerably more or considerably impressive relative to 5 Pro, if you think about it. Okay. So that's what GPT says about GPT. Now I'm going to tell you about just my experience yesterday working on a tick chart. So probably not going to share this EA for a while because it's really flimsy. I don't want to share it if it's not that good. But there's this book, okay? Forex price action scalping. And then it's a nice book. And I read this book and there's so many examples of how to trade, but all of these are tick charts. So you'd need to read the book to really kind of understand what's going on. But this is a tick chart. This isn't a time chart. And you can see the time, like they're kind of spread apart, right? There's this bigger gap here between these two times than over here because it's a tick chart. And the way it works is once X amount of ticks have occurred, then begin the new candle, as opposed to once 60 seconds has occurred, then begin a new candle. That's kind of a complex thing to code. And I coded it. I used GPT. I did this months ago, many months ago, probably like almost a year ago. And then I used Pro, by the way. Then I revisited it yesterday with 5.1, started making some modifications, see if we can iterate on it. And surprisingly, it actually did a really good job. Very few errors. It's the weekend now, and you can't backtest the tick chart. It doesn't work that way because it's generating a new chart. So I'm just stuck. I just have to wait until there's actual price action, or I use Bitcoin, but then that would take a lot of changes that I just don't want to make. So I just have to wait. All right, now you know what I'm working on. With yesterday's workflow, while I was using 5.1, I found that it takes like a solid, sometimes 45 seconds, just 45 seconds, and it gives you that next version. And it's as accurate, if not a little bit more accurate, than the Pro. Now the Pro, you spend like 15 minutes sometimes waiting for that next iteration, and then you find out that there's a bunch of errors. And then you have to go in, make a decision that may or may not cost you another 15 minutes. Where do I copy all the errors, the compilation errors, paste them in, and then just hope for the best? Or do I reprompt and just kind of shorten the new feature that I want to add to the next iteration, which may cost another 15 minutes. With 5.1, it's kind of easy. You can just sit there, make that change, and you get that problem, the problematic next iteration sooner, which means you save a lot of time. You can just work and iterate much, much faster. And I did find that it was more accurate. Now, I don't know, I can't say because I've only tested it for 1 day, if it really is more accurate. Maybe there are some functions or features that it doesn't do that well with. Only time will tell. But yeah, so that's my main, I would say, experience, personal experience, not what GPT says about GPT with 5.1 versus 5 Pro. And I also briefly mentioned 5. Okay, that's pretty much it. That's everything I wanted to talk about for this video. I'm very curious to know how your workflow, coding workflow with GPT is. Vibe coders unite. So let me know. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope it was useful.